The monuments are the Maya Devi Temple and the marker stone.
Or also during our task group, but the minimum facilities for visitors might be necessary even in a sacred garden. I know that in a master plan, we don't have any visitor facilities there, but it's just the lawn and the archaeological remains. But we need to think about the fulfillment of the visitors' demands. So the restroom and the shoes box and also the water facility will be necessary in the sacred garden. That is our proposal today. And also for the this is the restroom at Thai Visitor Center. I'm really surprised to see that there's even the space to take a rest, and the two ladies are actually taking care of the facilities every day. So again, if we make a new restroom, that means new maintenance costs will be also paid by the LDT. So making a new infrastructure does not mean that the construction, but also the maintenance is going to be very important. This is how it looks like. And also, as for the design and also the skeptic time, the discussion point, one is about as mentioned in the morning session already, but we need a clear procedure for the review of any new construction project in Sacred Garden before procurement. That is the most important point, and I'd like to make the first stress on my presentation. Confirmation of the archaeological risk map, which is already prepared by the archaeological team, but also at the same time, if necessary, we need to conduct the archaeological geophysics.
What the requirements are. And I think one of the main points is that the requirement has been that we need a larger area and that we need to provide certain facilities and improve the facilities for the visitors. And I think this is what has been worked on. The other interesting aspect is, of course, the visibility of the Ashoka pillar, that we are looking at how to improve also the image of these facilities in respect to the importance of the site. And then I think the initial steps of trying to have the structures that are going to be built somehow integrated into the landscape, that we try to make sure that it's not bright and colorful and that it sort of distracts from the setting. I think that's already a very important thought that needs to go into the design process. Now I think the questions that have arisen, which I think have already been raised by Professor Kurose, is that one is that it's sort of in a process of change, that we were looking at the entire inner sacred garden within the water body to be one single area, that we possibly cannot achieve that right away. So this is one step which then might sometime very soon in the future be again extended. So I think in the design process we would, the question would arise of how. The other is, of course, what is the larger plan? I mean, I think on the one hand, we say, okay, roughly it is that we define this area within the water body as one single space. But would we have a plan for that, which then we can say, this is the overall plan, and we are taking the first step towards that. Maybe we could discuss that aspect as well. And there I'd like to just add something, which has been sort of my concern, is what about the rest of the sacred garden? It might be difficult to plan it out in detail, but would we have an initial discussion and the concept of the, 1 by 1 mile, well, not quite 1 by 1 mile area, sort of the outside area, which is very clearly, again, a movable restroom would mean that we have certain design requirements, whether it has wheels or not. It should be, something that then can be moved. But first of all, before having that, I think the question is the two that are already there, designed, or that have already been mentioned. Those can be developed into proper facilities, and do we need extra, how, where, and in what configuration? I think that would really be an important discussion, because from the LET side, it's this back and forth, and yes, and we need, but how do we do it? And so it would be good to come to some kind of an understanding of how we deal with this. So I'll leave the rest to the continued discussion here.
Thank you very much.
Security gate gonna be stay like the next 10 years. That is the phase 2 strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose. The question or comment is?
So for the toilet is concerned,
Recommendations for the archaeology team was to conduct additional geophysics. So Lumbini Development Trust to develop reversible, non-intrusive. Therefore, we ourselves should also be explicit in how we integrate reversibility. This is a discussion we've had for many years with the Maidevi shelter, but reversibility, it's wonderful to build, but how do we then reverse that process? So it's just we could have an exemplar which would really, I think, be very useful. And then and then in terms of the walkways, I'm assuming we're following the development that was co-designed within the current fence of raised walkway on sterile soil to protect what may be beneath, which I think is excellent. And then finally, in the plan, where do visitors actually learn about the significance and exploration of the significant spirituality and history of the site? Do they do that all outside, or is there any provision of that inside? And actually, where is the correct place? Thank you.
Which is membered by the LDT's engineers and also from other colleagues. And my observation was it's not a small number who is using the mobile toilet. Quite many people is actually using. One reason might be because there is a toilet. If you don't have, they don't go. But if you have, and if your friends say, I will go to toilet, maybe I should go. That might be the reason. But on the other hand, the existing mobile toilet has been criticized by reactive modeling issue. So that we cannot keep the existing mobile toilet. We have to think about some other way or just remove it. So as for the restroom, I still have myself don't have the strong opinion, but this 900 meter is not easy distance for the elderly or disabled to go and back. If you want to go to the restroom during the meditation.
Antiquity of Lumbini back and back, before the Asokan period, before the use of brick. And if you look very carefully in the slide on the right, you can see a dark layer. That is a cultural layer. This indicates that actually the sequence of the Maidevi temple starts before the use of brick. So whilst we should always be extremely careful of brick and the protection of brick, we are dealing with cultural horizons which we know from the dating now date to the very lifetime of the Buddha. Cultural horizons, natural horizons, which date to that period, which aren't monumental like brick, but are in clay. Now, of course, we're extremely lucky when we removed that curb, we found the only evidence that one normally finds from this period in terms of structures. when you find a brick wall, the brick wall is easy to follow. In the period before, people used timber posts. They would dig a hole, put in a post, put in another post, you'd stretch a fence between it. All that's left once that post has rotted is a hole, normally a hole filled with a darker material, contrasts. This dates to 6th century BC, and it is at the centre, this replicated pattern of embellishment and enshrinement. One might even imagine it actually as the earliest shrine structure we have. It shouldn't be. What is the significance of it? Well, it's unlocked what many scholars have been looking for centuries, to try to find cultural layers associated with the very life of the Buddha, and they are there. So what I'm trying to stress is, whilst we focus, of course, on the brick-built structures, the structures below the ground that extend all the way into the monastic zone are of such high significance because they take us straight back to the individual, that period of the historical Buddha. And whilst people have said the hope of finding early levels is almost zero, here we have them almost perfectly preserved. And of course, that is what draws later the Emperor Soka. As Professor Nishimura mentions, the Asokan pillar is dominated by the 2002 shelter. It is over it. And of course, it indicates a greater history because it refers to Lumbini village that we know is here as well, and is as significant. It's South Asia's earliest native village in historical texts. Underneath the monasteries that we walk past, there are post holes dating to 6th century BCE as well, showing that continuity of devotion, of meditation, and also the separation between domestic, between monastic, and the actual shrine itself. Not to forget that the natural environment there is also an environment which has shaped the development of this site. Here you have at the bottom, archaeologists dig holes to give you help. And you may even recognise a younger version of the Joint Secretary with an auger in the bottom right, because this is tracing an ancient river channel through the Maya Devi, the sacred garden. We have attempted to do risk mapping. This is being enhanced all the time. So what are the key points that I would really like to stress? Firstly, the surface archaeology, subsurface it should be, apologies. No, this is correct, sorry. The surface archaeology beneath the Maya Devi shelter comprises brick and tile. The subsurface archaeology contains traces of human activity which has left its traces in old land surfaces below the ground, post holes and pits, as structural materials were perishable. The third bullet is that the subsurface archaeology contains old land surfaces which record human and natural archaeology extends from beneath the Maya Devi shelter and stretches out across the World Heritage Property as far as the village. And this is the takeaway in a way. Any intrusive activities will result in the irreversible destruction of these very significant records. Consideration. Firstly, for the 2002 structure, wooden pile foundations were introduced. The damage was less than if they had been enormous concrete piles, but all intrusive activities are irreversible. And therefore the takeaway is no further intrusive foundations should be cut into the archaeological deposits. If necessary, the piles, the wooden piles, should be incorporated into additional or subsequent plans. Also, we've talked a lot about water, the need to drain the site to tackle the waterlogging problem, which threatens the brick. But we have to remember it threatens the brick. But we've had some consultants from UNESCO, I have to admit, who've come and have said, just cut huge drains round a pump, because that then destroys those very subsurface, old land surfaces which relate to the life of the Buddha himself. So once planned and approved via an HIA, any improved drainage, plans for any improved drainage within the sacred garden should be preceded by archaeological excavation associated with heritage science, because we have to realize we have to maximize data recovery from this irreversible activity which is necessary for the preservation of the brick. Further considerations, and this is where through osmosis perhaps, or proximity with Professor Nishimura, these are the ways that actually I ask the same questions, which I think are, as he's indicated, some of the fundamental questions. I've worded them slightly differently. Do the archaeological remains of the Asokan temple need to be viewed closely from a walkway as currently? Is that necessary? Do visitors have to walk actually on top of some of the walls and look down into the temple? That's a question that I think is partly philosophical, it's partly managerial, it's partly preservation. I wasn't quite as brave as Professor Nishimura, and putting, could a facsimile be placed there, could it be placed in a shrine? Because I remember over 20 years ago it was in a different place, and people were still able to venerate. Does the longer term we will have to think of before we can reach a design? And then some other points. The doorways currently are in the north and the south. Historically, the doorway...
Come for pilgrimage at the place where he was born. It's almost as close to as meeting the Buddha himself. So this is the bottom line that motivates us, that when we receive someone in Lumbini, we don't see them as a visitor or pilgrims only. We see them that someone is coming to start this connection with the Buddha himself. I think this idea, especially I'm waiting to also hear from our most venerable monks, also our venerable nun also, at this point, would like, and I would encourage them to enlighten us a little bit more on their perspective. Because there are also Sangha who have been running an operating monastery, meditation center here for a long time, interacting with the site daily, with visitors, taking the faithful also for guides and inspiration. Even from Buddhist point of view, and also from the perspective of someone local here, I remember that as a young boy, when I was barely in grade 2 or 3, my grandmother took me for head saving ceremony there, as it was considered our ancestral shrine. Back then I had no idea what it would cost me to save the head at the Buddha's birthplace. I would have ended up becoming a Buddhist monk. But I remember that from that time onward, I had the opportunity to see the Mayadeva shrine as a sort of sanctum sanctorum, as a point of focus for devotion, for reverence, for authenticating the site in many layers. Last 4 years, especially, I have had to look at it from management perspective. So many challenges. As I read through IC reports, volumes and volumes of reports on water leakage, on high condensation, on lack of ventilation, and so much evaporation going on. The very structure is built itself in a way that it kind of, because of the high water content, helping evaporate the water and bringing crystallized forms and destroying the layers and so forth. I've looked at it, that is a management nightmare. Building is not climate friendly, not sustainable, not long term, not designed to last for a few hundred years. But however, to intervene in it is something so difficult. This is a World Heritage property. You need to establish everybody's consensus. I strongly believe that the time is there also because our World Heritage committees, Paris, had come on a reactive monitoring mission last year. And one of the key recommendations was also that this shelter needs immediate address. It needs immediate intervention. We have also had dialogues at the ministry previously also that if UNESCO experts could provide the proper new Maya shelter could be like, then there is a possibility to organize an international architectural competition in a way, to invite ideas. Let's see what people come up with. I believe that this could be a high time to intervene with something. Find a new solution that is more climate friendly, that respects and honors the sentiment, and also solves long-term problems by just removing the stumbling blocks that are in place. How do we establish that? How do we establish this critical need? That these are the reasons why a new shelter has to be brought here. And then what that new shelter could be like. These two would be very important narratives to arrive to. Another aspect I have noticed quite often that had changed from last 5 years. That we have new interpretation of the site that we had no access to 5 years, 10 years ago. As Professor Rabin was mentioning, visitors coming to Lumbini 10 years ago, the focus was Ashoka Pillar. And now we know that just below Market Stone, there is another layer, there's Ashokan layer. People might be interested to learn about the temple built by Ashoka himself. And now we know that even below the Ashokan layer, there is another layer. So I think the challenge also is for the site to address how to interpret all of this information. And that should be another consideration. Another problem, I regret that I could not stay in the earlier session quite longer. Also because, unfortunately, as a monk, I have many roles. So there are 500 people that have been ordained in Lumbini for 2 weeks. And they have become a temporary ordained monk. Today is their graduation ceremony when they can be sent home. So they have been working since morning for me to show up and to sort of say, okay, you can go home. So unfortunately, I had to run away. But what I wanted to bring also to the visitor management survey aspect was another comment, and I would like you all to help us think about that. As we talk about the visitor management survey, management ideas, there is another lacking point, that is the weakness of interpretation. There is no proper interpretation site as it is. Of course, as per the Kenzutani planning, our cultural zone, our museums and so forth should be the proper site for interpretation. But I have heard our experts talk in the past meetings also often reiterated that the information now we have access to in the Mayadevi area itself due to past exploration, we should be able to interpret that in some way. And that would make the visitors. I would like us to also reflect upon from the Buddhist cultural point of view, what are the requirements for the visitors? What are their needs when they're visiting the shrine? Do we need more space for meditation? Do we allow a larger congregation to be able to use the site at a time, all of those considerations. So I'm actually open and looking forward to more ideas on this discussion.
So I support Basanta's idea of leaving the existing archaeological remains as they are without building or constructing some structure around it. And then